Welcome, everyone.
My name is Chuck Pulfer. This is Kevin Glinsky. We're going to spend a few minutes to talk about PureCloud APIs, mainly how OAuth works and how notifications work. I have a couple surprises in here, some things that aren't yet on the Dev Center or Dev Forum that I've kind of worked out, just with the internal stuff. So I'll do a couple demos, and Kevin is going to take you through OAuth and all its greatness, and kind of help you understand a little bit more about PureCloud and how authentication works through our authorization using OAuth. Just by show of hands, how many people have written a line of code in, say, the last month? Okay, so that's pretty good. How about the last week? Like, pretty avid developers. Okay, great, all right. So there's several people from the API team here in the room, and we're always looking for feedback and any kind of information you might have about what's working, what's not working for you. So really take an opportunity. We'll have time for a Q&A at the end here. Take that opportunity to talk to us about what you're trying to do or whatever. We'll be here all week, but now's a really good time because you got us in the room. So with that, I'll let Kevin get started on the OAuth presentation.
All right. Thanks, Chuck, and thanks for recruiting me to do this late last night. All right, so PureCloud uses OAuth2 to handle its authentication. This is the book definition of OAuth. It's very heavy. It's not that fun to read. The English version, the human version. So OAuth is the authorization method that lets users grant applications access to their data. And we'll go through that, what that means throughout this course. You've probably used OAuth. If you haven't used it through PureCloud and you're new to it, you've used it in other apps. This is Strava using my Google account to log me in. So this is an OAuth flow. This is asking for, those 4 bullet points are scopes. So Strava is going to say, okay, I want your information to be able to know who you are in Google, know your list of people and friends, your email address, and your basic profile information. Like I said, those are scopes, and I have a whole other talk coming up tomorrow at 9 a.m. on both fine-grained access controls and scopes. If you are a partner, and definitely if you are a Foundry partner, you want to show up to that one to figure out how things are going to change for you. So why OAuth? Each party that's involved in the OAuth logging flow can limit access to an application at any time. So for a application to get access to your data, your user has to grant access to that application. And those users can deny access at any time also. Likely, the service provider, which is PureCloud in this case, can block applications that are detrimental to the system. We have had to do this in the past. Without naming any names, we had a customer who was creating and deleting users, and that got stuck in a loop and was thrashing our backend services. So we had to kill the application to protect all the other customers running from PureCloud. That's very rare that it happens, and we will work with you when that does, if it does. And then applications can refuse to act on behalf of a user. And the best part is that a user never has to give their password to a third-party vendor. Trust us with your password. We have lots of controls in place to protect it. The more you have to give out your password to third parties, the more vulnerable it is, the more likely it is to leak. So if you can keep it with one provider, then it helps you stay safe on the internet. And then lastly, an application must define what data it's going to have access to. So this slide should have come first, but the 3 players in the OAuth flow are the end user. They own the data. The application wants to consume that data, and the service provider hosts that data. Now there's 4 types of OAuth login flows that we support. The implicit grant, authorization code grant, client credentials grant, and the OAuth2 SAML2 bearer grant. So I'll go through each one of these, and we'll start with the implicit grant. Implicit grant is the easiest grant of the 4. It's a single-step auth process. You redirect to PureCloud, we redirect them back to your app with a auth token. It's ideal for client-side applications, so stuff that runs only in the web browser, doesn't have a backend service. Desktop applications, if you write a C# app that logs into PureCloud, good use case here. It's easier to set up, but it is a little less secure than the auth code grant. So we normally recommend the auth code grant when you can. It's ideal for client-server apps, and it is more secure than the implicit grant. What happens is you direct your user to PureCloud. We direct them back to your app with an access code. You then take that access code, you send it back to PureCloud and say, hey, I'm this app, I really am. Now give you an access token. And through that four-step process, then we can verify that the person getting the access token actually deserves the access token. And then client credentials grant is ideal for back-end services. Now it's important to note that, so the reason it's ideal for back-end services is because it does not require a UI to log in. So it's good for automation of things behind the scenes. But it does not operate in the context of a user. So you cannot use client credentials apps to, say, perform call control on an interconnection. But you can use it to download all of your analytics data offline. And it is granted a PureCloud rule to operate under, so it doesn't have free access to everything. And they are specific to the org that they were created in. So if you are a partner and you can't create a client credentials grant that will work for your customers, whereas the previous two that I mentioned, you need one OAuth client that will work for every org, every customer. Most important slide, and I put this every time I talk about this, is to treat your client credentials grant client ID and your secret as if they were a password. If we see a secret pop up on the forum, if we see it in an email, we're going to have to revoke that secret. Because they are specific to one org, if you post your ID and your secret, and say you just have some sample code, my code's not working, you post it on the forum with your ID and secret in plain text, anyone can now take that ID and secret, log into your org, do whatever that app has permission to do. So we will delete the secret from the forum and reset it for you as well. Just remember this piece. Okay, so then the final OAuth grant type is the OAuth2 SAML2 bearer. And this acts as a bridge between a SAML2 identity provider, OAuth2 Login, and PureCloud. So you can use those services to authenticate and get you an access code. And now I'm going to bring Chuck back up, and he's going to go through a demo of how to actually get that token exchange.
Okay. So several developers in the room and other folks. So how many people are using single sign-on with PureCloud today? So a couple, okay. Single sign-on providers like Kevin mentioned, OneLogin, Okta, Ping Identity, Google Suites. There's a ton of them. I can only probably use maybe 5 or so. But there's an integration with SAML and OAuth, and it's in this spec, the OAuth to bearer. The SAML to bearer spec is part of the OAuth spec. It's in addition to it. And what this allows you to do, and this is kind of a cool example, so I'm going to give you I'll show you some code here in a second, but what this allows you to do is send a request to the PureCloud auth server with a SAML assertion encoded in that request, and we'll send you back an access token. So this is, pretty simple and straightforward. The one thing I'll point out though is in these requests you have to include your org name because the org name the PureCloud auth server won't assume your org name because multiple users can exist in multiple orgs with the same user ID. So you have to send in your org name. That's kind of the big difference in some of the other tokens or bearers. So let me flip over here. Really small. Okay. I cannot read that. Hold on. So what I've done here is I've created a very simple example. It's actually two examples that I'm commenting on some code real quick. So I've created a very simple example that will get an access token, create an identity provider, that, one login is, I'm simulating one login here, and then I'll create a SAML response and code that up. I'll send it to PureCloud, and I'll get an access token, and I'll fetch users me for that user. So there's some interesting things that can happen here. So if you're looking at this, you might realize if you were to write your own SAML provider, then you can impersonate users, and that is true. So this is an example that lets you impersonate users in your org. So it's a pretty powerful thing you can do that you may or may not want to do. So one other thing I'm going to bring up here real quick. So if we look in here, I've already run this once. So this is how you configure single sign-on. So I've configured this one login.
Make it bigger.
Oh, sorry. Can you do that maybe? So this is how you configure single sign-on in PureCloud. And in this case, I've used the API, and you'll see that. I'm just going to create it again. I'll just keep creating it over and over again. In this case, I'm creating a one login one. The only thing that really matters for this example is the one login certificate. So this is the public certificate for the public-private key pair that SAML uses to encrypt, and then we can verify, PureCloud can verify that it actually came from, who set it in. So with that, I love live coding. Good. Keep on your toes. Okay, so I just ran this, so I'm just going to kind of walk you through a little bit of this here. I've got some logging in here, so we can kind of make this out. So the bottom part is the interesting part, right? So, okay, so I created a client credential token. That's a really easy step, right? Because I already created that. You don't need to worry about that part. So, and then I created that identity provider, that one login identity provider I just showed you. I was just showing this so you can show you how to do it in code. And then here's the SAML response that I built. So this is what a SAML identity provider sends to PureCloud, right? So this is an XML doc. This is SAML2 spec. It's really cumbersome and painful to use. It reminds me of programming in COM years ago, and so there's some bits in here that are kind of interesting though that I think is one is here's the certificate. This is the public certificate. So that's the public side of the certificate that we can now verify that we have, right? And then also down here, you can see here's the issuer, which this isn't that big of a deal because we're not doing redirects. We send the request directly. And then this is the other key part here is I added the org name. In this case, the org name is DevCon19. That's the name of this org. So this is kind of the key part. Without this, like I said, PureCloud won't honor or won't validate the SAML request. So with that SAML request, PureCloud issued an access token. Here it is. Here's the access token. It's a bear. You can see that here. There's the expiration on it. And so the next thing it did was, so I should point out that this is an access token for my user. This isn't the access token for a client credential grant. This is an access token for my user and this org. And so we can now call users me with that access token. And so that's what I did here. So I called users me with that access token. You can see here I am. It's my ID. And then maybe some interesting things down here as I had it expand on the org. And you can see here's the org. It's DevCon19. And then I also had it expand the token details. So this is just expanding details on the token. You can see that the token was from DevCon19, or the token context is DevCon19. The home org is the same. And then the OAuth client, you can see that this is my bearer, this is my SAML to bear client credential grant. Or, I'm sorry, not client credential grant, SAML to bear grant type. So this token was created with the SAML to bear grant type. So I don't know if people have wanted to do this before. This example, like, it's hard to find these examples, like, to be a SAML provider, to actually send and to create that SAML response and that auth end. There's not a lot of examples out there. I found a couple different examples and ended up kind of diving in and figuring it out on my own. And it did take me a little bit of time, but that's probably the key part if you ever want to do that, is just creating this SAML response. And if people are interested in this code, I'd be happy to share it with you. It's nothing special, but it would allow you to do some interesting things for some test orders if you wanted to do that. The only thing I'm just going to like put my little like caution hat on for a second and say, like, be a little bit careful here, because you're impersonating users. You're not using user passwords, right? You're creating access tokens because you're the provider. You are the identity provider. So you have to be a little bit careful there with those certificates, like the private side of that cert, because if anybody else gets it, they can impersonate every user in your org, which is not great. So you can, but if anybody's interested in this, just let me know, and I'd be happy to share that. So that's SAML to bear. I don't know that we've really talked about that in other presentations before, so I spent a lot of time on it, but I thought people would hopefully find that somewhat interesting. Another thing that probably people haven't seen is, this is kind of related to auth, is that if you want to use single sign-on in your org, which I know many of you have, at least a couple, so that means that probably you have a corporate strategy. You use OneLogin or you use Okta, and you probably don't want your users to store passwords in PureCloud at all. I mean, that's why you have a single sign-on strategy to begin with in your organization. So this is a feature that we released partially. We released the first part of it, so you call it an MVP, minimal viable. And what we did was we said, you can turn off the PureCloud identity provider. What this means is that now you are solely reliant on your single sign-on provider, your OneLogin, your Okta. It's the only one that's going to be allowed to create tokens for your organization, and disables PureCloud. That means that your users can't, reset their password, get the email, they can't do any of that. They can't log into PureCloud directly. They have to go through your single sign-on provider, which I know a lot of folks have some pretty, they use their single sign-on providers for some security reasons, right? They want IP whitelisting, or they have different rules on where you can log in from, or session lengths and things like that. So anyway, this is something you can do right from the API. It's documented on the Dev Center, so you can go to the Dev Center and look up identity providers, PureCloud, and you just send a put with disabled true, and it'll disable it for you. But a little careful catch there is if you do turn this off, you will not be able to log in if your single sign-on provider, if your cert expires, or if your identity provider goes offline for whatever reason. So a little caveat there. So this comes up quite a bit, actually. I had a discussion last night about it. Rate limits. PureCloud, we have rate limits. We didn't release our public API until we had some kind of rate limits in place. We have other limits too. How many users can be in a queue? There's lots of limits out there. How many OAuth clients you can have in an org? Probably many limits you've never even heard of because you don't hit them, and that's fine. But in the case of rate limiting, when you hit the public API, we have a limiter that says you can only do that so often. And our default limiter is 300 requests over 60 seconds per access token. And you'll get a 429 response if you go over the limit. You can check the HTTP header. There's a retry after. It's a pretty well-known header. And you can look at that header for the number of seconds until that rate limiter expires, and you can make requests again. So you can do that. You follow that. There's some good information on the Dev Center about this. There's a nice write-up about rate limiting, some of our strategies and why we have it, things like that. Things to keep in mind is the rate limits, I like to say that they really do like three things. They protect the platform, so protect each other, each tenant from themselves. They protect our costs, because a lot of requests can cost us a lot of extra money. And in many ways, it promotes good application development. It's not the answer for having devs write good apps, but it helps them because in many ways it's saying, hey, why can't I just request 100,000 users over a minute, and one request at a time? That's just bad practice, right? You would look for, as a mature developer, you would look for, where's my bulk fetch, right? So we have lots of bulk and batch fetching in the API, and if you're finding that you're hitting a limit and you're like, man, where's my bulk or batch fetch? Let us know. Ask on the forum. We probably just haven't added it yet. We've added several in the last year or two, so we're continuing to add those. So let us know. Sometimes we have limitations and we can't add them, and that's why they don't exist. But we can have that discussion with you, certainly. So one cool thing, I think people will like this, is we have this limit registry that Alex is working on in the back. So he's gotten really far on it. I've been on vacation for 2 weeks, and I'm sure it's done by now. So, but the limit registry, what it's going to allow you to do is, or allow us to do, is have a centralized place where all the limits within PureCloud are stored. These are these rate limits. These are the limits on accounts and different things that exist throughout all of PureCloud. We're gonna have that information stored in documents. Applications will be able to use, different microservices will be able to pull that data to figure out what the limits are, which means that we can do a couple cool things. We can have a limits per organization. So maybe your organization does things a little bit differently and we need to crank it up to 11. We'll be able to do that. We'll be able to turn it up. Sometimes there might be an additional charge. Sometimes it might just be, we turned it up for you. That's something that support can do. I'd like to make it self-service. I don't think we're going to get to where we can have you bump them up but yourselves self-service. So it's going to be something initially to go through support, but support will have access to this as well. And also, we're going to publish these limits, the ones that we think make sense to publish, on the Dev Center. So you can go to the Dev Center and you'll see our limits. And the cool thing about that is, since we have a limit registry, the limits won't be like a documentation person, asking the dev what the values are and writing them down. The limits will be read directly for what your organization has from the manifest, from a schema. So it will be exactly what your organization has for limits, which will be pretty cool. Another thing that we're pretty close on, and you can talk to Kevin more about this, he's in the front here, is the API usage dashboard. This is the UI work's being worked on right now, and we're in pretty good final stages of this. This is going to let you look at how your apps are being used, which apps your organization is using. Are they returning 200s or 400s or 500s? Are they getting rate limited? Lots of information about your apps and the apps that you've purchased. Maybe you bought an app and you want to see, does it make a lot of API requests? How chatty is it? What API requests does it make? A lot of that's going to be answered through the API usage dashboard. So, kind of switching gears now, I wanted to talk about notifications. I'm sure several of you have, you've used the API and you found that there's some need to have some more real-time or more eventing strategy. So we do have a notification service, lots of documentation on the Dev Center out there. This is some kind of key points to talk about. Why do we have events? Why not just pull? I think in a perfect world, you really would just pull. Events are expensive. There's all kinds of expense for us on our side. There's expense on your side, keeping these socket connections open, and what happens if they go down, and what happens between the time they went down. There's just a lot of things. There's a lot of bookkeeping, things to keep track of there. So they're kind of painful. But it turns out they're really valuable in telephony. I mean, it's really nice to know on a conversation when an agent is being alerted. That's pretty good. And you want to know as soon as possible, right? You don't want to wait 5 seconds or 1 second on a poll. You want to get it immediately. And that's what these are really for. So we've got all kinds of, you can go out on the web, you can go out on the Dev Center and check out what topics are available. There's a bunch more topics in this, and they change all the time, as new services and features are added to PureCloud. They'll just show up on this, and you can include it there. Okay, so, WebSockets, so this is how we do our notifications. So we use the standard WebSocket. All the modern browsers support WebSockets these days. It's pretty straightforward. I'm sure everybody's somewhat familiar with WebSockets and how they do. And so what I was going to do now is just take a few moments and kind of walk you through how they work for us and the steps that you need to take to do that. And I've got a little demo that I put together last night. So a couple things to note, and I've got some additional comments to this in a little bit here, but is we consider a WebSocket a channel. We just call it a channel. So a notification channel, that's kind of one WebSocket for us. And each notification channel could have, or each auth token, so each access token can have 5 of those channels. And each channel can have 1,000 subscription limit. So the reason that this comes into play, for those of you who haven't hit this or haven't considered this happening yet for you, if you've got a custom app that does this, is that say you want to, say you've got 10,000 users in your org and you want to listen to every single one of their presence. Today, if you want to do that, you've got to subscribe individually to each one of those users' presence. So you're going to hit that 1,000 limit if you got 10,000 users. So you need 10 channels, but you're going to need 2 auth tokens That's not how we designed it to work, so we've got some new things coming along that's going to help you with that. So those limits are in place for a reason based on the way the technology was originally made, and we're making some improvements to make it kind of scale up a little differently. So how do you use notifications? I talked about the channel. You get a channel, WebSocket, you subscribe, you can change your subscriptions around, send that health ping up to us, and then you can close it. I mean, that's pretty much the gist of it. So in walking through this is kind of neat here. We didn't talk about it earlier, but if you're using our API, hopefully you're using the SDKs. The SDKs make your life a lot easier. If you're writing in a language that we don't have an SDK for, let us know. A lot of times we can add new languages to our SDK with no big effort. We've been working on a C++ one that has been a big effort, but that's for different reasons. That's just a more language-specific thing, if you're familiar with C++. So if there's a language that you don't see out on our Dev Center, let us know. We'll see if we can add it for you. All the SDKs are generated, so we don't have one person sitting around writing SDKs. It doesn't work like that. We publish a new version of the API, and all the SDKs are generated at that same time, and they're locked in with what's available. So the latest version of the SDK is the version and build that's running in production in all the prod environments. So they're all locked in step. Same with the Dev Center code; it's all locked in. So use the SDK. That's my plug for the SDK. So you've got HTTP requests and JavaScript. Create a channel. It's pretty straightforward. One thing to note, well, I guess it's pretty straightforward. Create a channel, boom, you get back a URL, and that's your channel ID. That's the WebSocket that you connect to. And you take that channel URL, that connect URI, and create a new WebSocket. This really is kind of silly to have these slides up here. So instead, last night I created an example. So I'm going to make you watch these slides, and I'm going to show you a code example. But then at the bottom, you can obviously close it too. And some of the more interesting things are around subscribing to topics. So you can see here, this is what I was talking about, like that is this first topic there in that array list. That first one is, a single user's presence, and then the second one is that same user's routing status. So you can see, you could get a lot of these if you were writing an application that was trying to pull from lots of users. This was mainly designed to be a user would use this for their notifications, not that an organization would use it to get all their notifications, which is why there's those scaling limits in there. But in this case, we say, hey, let's subscribe to these two things. We send a post, and poof, now you're subscribed. When those things change, you'll get an event. You can also do a put on the subscription, and put and post, so what's the difference? So this is pretty important, because the post just adds another subscription to the existing ones, and the put does a full replace. And that becomes really important when you hit your limit of 1,000. So if you're just posting, you'll hit your limit on the 1,000th one, and you'll probably just keep hitting it if you're not doing error handling. Whereas if you're using a put, you'll hit your limit and you won't resubscribe. It'll be a little bit more obvious. So in general, actually the way we use it internally for our apps is we mainly only use the put. And then a ping, so you can send a ping up to us. And that helps us know, because what we found is that some of the browsers, specifically Chrome, we had an interesting situation where we had people in Sydney, Australia demoing out of our US East, and there was some odd network latency that was happening. And we saw that the connection was dead, but Chrome kept it alive, kept the WebSocket alive. And so the application was just sitting there thinking that more traffic was going to flow, and it never did. So by sending a ping up to us, we'll physically close the socket, and that will make sure that you know that if there is some kind of odd network latency or issue like that. So that's a good thing for us to keep that alive, or to kill it for you. Okay, and I showed you all those, and this is the SDK. This is the Java SDK to just simply add. This does basically all those things, right? It creates the WebSocket. It makes the call to the subscriptions, and that's it. And it's all nice and neat and clean code, and I can fit it on one slide, which was kind of nice. So let me pull that up real quick here. So same example as before, but I'm going to uncomment out those lines of code. So that was the first example, and this is the second example. So I kind of made this really simple. So all this is going to do is it's going to create a WebSocket connection and listen for changes to presence on that same user, that same Chuck user that I was using before. So if I fire this up, so while it's starting up, I'll just show you like it's pretty straightforward. There's really not a whole lot to it. So I get an access token, I create an API client, and then I wrote this little notification helper class. And there's the code for my slide to do the connection, and then I just wrote wrappers for connect, ping, and close. So it is pretty straightforward. So it's up and running, and it's just sitting there listening for events right now. So what will happen if we wait around long enough is we'll see a ping. So we send pings from the server down to the client every 30 seconds, I think it is. I think because it's been about 30 seconds. So every 30 seconds we send a heartbeat down, and that's what you see this heartbeat right here that just happened. So now I could go change presence, and we can see that happen. So let me do that. So in Chrome here, I've got two windows. So developer tools, if you haven't seen these make things a lot easier. So on this page here, I can say, okay, give me the presence for this user. So this code's going to come in here and it says, hey, this user's current presence is available. And here I am running in the client, and you can see, hopefully you can see that. I am available. So there I am available. So now if I just go in from the client, I can change myself to busy. And I flip back to my app. Not that. Okay, you can see here, I just logged it out, system presence, busy. So now I've changed to busy. So pretty straightforward. And then the other thing I was going to show you is the dev tools are pretty handy. So you can kind of do a lot of testing on your own without having to mess with doing this without having to even have a client running, so you could change presence for other users and things like that. So I could come in here and I could, for instance, say change a user's presence, and this user ID, in this case, I'm going to change their presence to, this is the one for busy. So I change them back to available, I send this, now I set back to busy again, or now I set the break. We can come back to our little app. You can see, yep, you can see where I set it to available there. Now it's at the break. My heartbeats are still coming in. So, also, if you just want to, I started this before we started our session, so I did a lot here. Maybe I should refresh this page. We've also got this pretty handy notification tester tool. So you can load this up for your user, and when you use the dev tools, it just loads it up just for you. You can come in here and you can say, I want to subscribe to my presence. And now it says here, it's subscribe to your presence. We'll start seeing over here events coming in, so I can come over here real quick. I can change. And you can see my presence just changed here. Here's the payload, just changed to busy, that's what I changed it to. So these are some ways that as you're writing an app, you can use these tools to kind of help guide you and aid you in this. Those code snippets that are in my code for configuring the notification handler and stuff, they're right here in the Dev Center. So this is just under this one is, for instance, is the Java SDK. So right under the Java SDK, there's an example right here how to use this notification handler. Okay, so now everyone can write their own apps before I'm done. It did take me, I think it took me like 20 minutes last night to write that. So it was nice because I hadn't done it in a long time. So, and I hadn't done a Java example before. So I'll do Java. That was kind of fun. Okay, so kind of just a couple more things here. I've kind of hinted on this, and obviously, if you want to subscribe to all the users in your org, it's kind of not very easy today. requires a lot of overhead on your part of maintaining different tokens and channels and all that nonsense. So a couple different things we're working on is one is these wildcard subscriptions. So in the case of presence, like in this case, when you subscribe, you would just say subscribe to users.star.presence. And that would subscribe you to all the presence for all the users in your whole org. So obviously there's some permissions associated with that. This is actually something that we've got coded up, and it's running in our testing environments. We're doing performance testing on it right now. So I think this will be a good answer for folks that are wanting to write these bots or services that are behind the scenes kind of gathering lots of information from PureCloud. Lots of information about presence and routing status and conversations and queue conversations and these different stats and metrics that we've got. I think that's going to be a good answer there. When that comes out, you'll see notes on the dev forum for it, and there'll be additional documentation and stuff. So there's a few things. There's some underlying changes that we're making. We're actually looking at using AWS just released WebSockets for API Gateway, and that's what we're looking at using. That's what we're performance testing now. So once we get that kind of locked in and we feel good about it, then we'll put that on for folks. So if somebody's interested in that, let me know. It's something that I could maybe get you on an early adopter, do some beta with it, and you can try it out. The second thing is, and this is kind of, I'm putting this out there because this is an idea that we've been playing around with for a while. Actually, I was talking with someone last night and we were kind of going through this. But another option for us is if you have an AWS account or you want to get an AWS account and you want to use AWS Kinesis. Kinesis is a message bus similar to Kafka. And so what we could do is if you give us access to your AWS Kinesis streams, we can send PureCloud events directly to your AWS stream or your AWS Kinesis stream. That way, we get out of the business of WebSockets and managing your connections and all that. We'll just shove it in the Kinesis stream, and you can decide what you want your retention on your stream to be and how you want to consume it. You know, if you need multiple partitions or if you want to consume over multiple clients or however you want to solve that problem based on your amount of data. So that's something that, if people are interested in that, you let me know because I'd be interested in talking with you about it. We're doing similar things with data actions as far as configuring cross account. So I think we've already got things in place to do the cross account between our AWS account and your AWS account, and this would just allow us to do that. So okay, so I wanted to kind of plug this. Developer.mypurecloud.com. If you are going to develop software for PureCloud, you're going to want to. This is where you're going to want to be. This has got everything out there. We have, and then the second link there is the forum. The forum is your first place to go. If you have a question, if you have any kind of concern, read through the forum. There's a lot of examples out there. I think I don't have the stats handy. I think we had like 4,000 posts last year. So it's pretty active forum. There's a lot of information out there. It's also where you want to go when you want to know about announcements. So if we do have to make some kind of change to the API or if there's a new feature coming, all those types of announcements, they show up on the forum, and those announcements come from the developers. So the idea is that PureCloud developer, they're in charge of their own destiny and their own APIs. The API team helps them get there, right? We provide the infrastructure, but individual developers, if they need to make a change to an API or add something or add a feature, they go to the forum and they add to it, just like you would go to ask questions. So there's lots of people involved out there on the forum. And this is a cool little shot of my 7-year-old surfing, so I thought it was good to end on a happy little note. Turns out surfing, it's not as hard as it looks, and you don't need big waves. So that's all I have for right now, and I'd really love to open up to questions if anyone has any questions.
It'd be good if you could share the code and add for the sample reminder.
Okay, yeah. I'll throw it up on GitHub then. Yeah. I think if they let me. Is Tim in here?
So with the
Yes. Go ahead.
sorry, where you were looking at bulk requests, I had a recent one with a customer with routing skills. So because they configured all the routing skills for their agents and didn't document them, and now they've got to either manually go through the website in every person and note them down, or with the API I only recently looked at routing skills on the API, but again, you've got a request per user, so you need to get all the user IDs first and do it. Some of our customers are using the developer forum API helper, which means that they can get some data out without really writing any code. But that's a bit awkward for...
Yeah, so the question, let me make sure I got the question right. It's just, there's no bulk API for assigning skills to users, right?
No, this is just to grab the data really at the moment.
Yeah, or even getting the data. Yeah, that's something that has come up a couple times, and I definitely I've talked to that team about that, and they've got some tech debt they're working on right now, and that's one of the things that I'd like to see them add is a batch or bulk. So that is something. I'll make a note of that, and I know that that's come up, and there are some Jira tickets already for doing that. They just haven't gotten into it yet. So that one's going to continue to come up, guaranteed. Anyone else? Yes.
Does the creation of OAuth credentials count against our license count? I know earlier you said those credentials are based off of our PC3 or 2 license, whatever we have, but...
So the question was around licensing impacts of client credentials or OAuth grants. So the OAuth client credential grant is not licensed, and so it does not impact your licensing. Okay. However, if you were to use the SAML to bearer and you're creating access tokens for individual users, that would obviously impact your licensing. But no, not the OAuth client credential grant. Yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say, with the SAML 2 bearer, obviously you set up a one login, but weren't actually using one login. Until I know that the SAML 2 is on the roadmap for open for any provider, but the process that you use, would that be a supported process if the one login is not? So I've got a customer with SiteMinder, for example.
Yep.
And
so the question is, what if we want to use an identity provider that isn't on our manifest of, supported, officially tested? Totally. So SAML's the standard. We kind of made this. We started this approach a while back and said, well, listen, we want to make sure that the SAML works for the things that we say it's going to work for. So we decided we're going to test it for one login. That was the first one we did. We tested it for one login. We have automated tests that simulate one login, exactly how they sign things, how they do things. Those automated tests launch and run every time we deploy to every environment. So we did that for all of the ones that we support officially. So that means that we've got a pretty good broad range of SAML features, but we don't support every SAML feature. So in your case, to get that provider working, it might not be a big deal. You might be able to use the one login. The ADFS one actually has the most options, and so that one would be the one that I would try first. But the thing is behind the scenes, we've just put a little sugar on the outside. Behind the scenes, all the providers look exactly the same, so they don't look any different. And we don't even identify them as one login or Okta. We just identify them as SAML features behind the scene. And we just kind of simplified it in the API. So you can totally use anything. And supporting generic SAML, if you read through the SAML 2 spec, it's pretty vast. And so you really come down and you just say, we support these features of SAML 2. We don't support the message level encryption right now, but it's not over TLS. So some people really want message level encryption. They have it turned on for their provider. We don't support that. We don't do the decryption, so we don't have that yet. But it is running over TLS, so the message is already, it's protocol level encrypted, right? It's just not message level encrypted. So.
Do you have a timeline for the Kinesis stream events?
So the Kinesis, do I have a timeline for the Kinesis stream event? So it's not on our roadmap, and that's why I'm interested in kind of putting it out there if people are. Because it's something that it would take some effort to build, and there's some challenges with it. So if we're going to do it, I kind of want to make sure that people are interested in using it. And so if that's something you're interested in, definitely talk to me about it and get your contact information. Because also we'd like to have some people data it out.
Yeah, related to that, we have this thing. We're like WebSocket adverse for don't get me started, but. It's a security thing, so if Kinesis lets you get past that and sort of say, hey, it's not WebSockets, so basically you take control, we're going to publish all these things. It may be a very good thing.
Yeah.
For folks who have that, and I don't know if we're alone, we might be, but if we're not, it might be like, yeah, if you don't have to go to WebSocket, it might give you another option.
Yeah, I've seen different people have adversity to WebSockets. You're not the first person to mention that for various reasons. Some are security based, some are just, people who've been programming for a long time and they're like, that's not how we do server-to-server communication here, so we don't want to do that. So I've heard that before. Yes,
Can you support Lambda invocations also?
Lambda invocations from the event. Oh yeah, we could probably do that too. You can do that with the data action stuff because they're doing that, right? So that would be kind of cool. So in this case, we would just, when the event comes in, instead of put it on your Kinesis stream, we just fire off a Lambda for you instead. So then you write the Lambda, right? You just give us the Lambda function, give us access to it, and you can do whatever you want. So you can do post-processing, transforming, fire other events, whatever you want to do with it, toss it in the database. Then maybe we should just do that, and then we can do the Kinesis stuff. So I'm sure people want both. Because Lambda has an additional cost. Right?
So can you,
Yeah,
when the
Kinesis doesn't.
when the event happens, you can trigger a data action, you say, right?
We could. We don't today, not with these notifications.
Oh, so is it possible to trigger a data action that's in the post to like my own API?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, I'm not an expert on data actions. but-
Okay.
There is a data action session coming up.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you can make API calls, right? You can make HTTP requests with data actions, right?
But you're saying that currently, like the event will not trigger a data action, is that?
Correct.
Not these events. Not these. Different notification events. There's lots of events in the system. But in this case, these events that I showed here, they're listing off of our main Kafka bus that runs. Every event that flows through PureCloud, every event goes to Kafka, and this notification service listens to some of those events, sees if anybody's subscribed, and then shoots them out over the WebSocket. So for us, we're already consuming these events. Where we send them isn't that big of a deal. Right now, we send it over WebSocket because our initial need was web browsers needed these notifications for, agent notification of a call or a stat update on the dashboard, things like that. And that's what they were originally designed for. Yes.
I don't know if I caught this right. When you were talking about the enforced single sign-on feature that was recently released, I thought I heard you say that it was MVP and
Yes.
more things were coming. What are those?
Okay, so the question was around, so you can disable the PureCloud identity provider, and the first pass was MVP, so what's next? So what's next is a white list of users that can still log into your order. So you could say, like, these 5 admins would still be able to log in with their PureCloud credentials, but nobody else could. And that kind of finishes it off for you being self-service on that.
The goal of that being if our SSO provider goes down, we can get usernames and passwords to our agents
Yep.
and other admin type functions.
Yeah, you could go in, at that point, you could go in, disable the single sign-on, re-enable PureCloud identity provider, tell your agents to hit reset password on our login page. They would get the ability then to create a password and log in. Yeah, so that would be your workaround. There would be obviously there's, different agents would have different abilities to do that, but that would be the workaround if you did have an outage with your single sign-on provider.
And with that feature, I've also noticed there's some cross-org ability for like our implementation or pro services partner to be able to log into our org.
Yes.
Is there any functionality that's limited when they do that, or could we enable single sign-on but still have them support, build, do whatever they need to do in our org?
Yeah, so the question was around how does that work with what we call auth words or trusted words. So in this case, a common scenario is a partner is given access to a customer's org, and so the partner would go in there and maybe do some maintenance, configure some edges, or troubleshoot, or whatever that is. And how does that work with single sign-on? And it uses the partner's, because the identity you're verifying is the partner's identity, the trust relationship's already been set up. So the authentication happens with the partner's org, not your customer org. So in that case, they would be able to still do things even if the PureCloud identity provider was disabled and single sign-on wasn't working. So that would be a way for them to get into.